A great pleasure for me to introduce our next speaker of the day. Jonas Himmelstrand is here all the way from Sweden. I first became aware of his work because I was researching the daycare topic here in Canada. And Jonas would send helpful email updates. I'm not even sure how I got on them, but there they popped into my box, talking about the realities of family policy in Sweden. And what I immediately noticed is that what I was learning from somebody living in Sweden was not what I was hearing from the Canadian press. For example, I remember one coming through showing higher rates of mental health disorders among Swedish youth. And that is absolutely not the story that we are getting from the Canadian media. Jonas has been a consultant in business for over 25 years, focusing on leadership, education, and personal development. He is the author of Following Your Heart in the Social Utopia of Sweden, and he's publishing another book at the end of this year. He's the founder of his own institute, the Mireja Institute, which I'm told is as close as a person who is an English speaker will get to pronouncing it appropriately. He focuses there on close relationships as the key to building welfare, development, and democracy. And closer to home, he's partnered with the Canadian psychologist, Dr. Gordon Neufeld, in writing, he's a representative in Sweden. Dr. Gordon Neufeld is the author of Hold On to Your Kids, Why Parents Need to Matter More Than Peers, and his co-author came and presented 2 years ago at the IMFC conference, Dr. Gabor Mate, which was another excellent presentation. Jonas lives in Uppsala, Sweden, with his wife and 3 kids. He homeschools them and plays the tenor saxophone in his spare time. Please join me in welcoming him.
Thank you very much. Good morning. It's a pleasure to be here. It's a pleasure to be invited all the way from Sweden. An honor to present here for the first time in Canada, and actually for the first time the subject in North America as well. I'm going to talk about the Swedish family policies, which you could say were instituted about 35 years ago, 1975, when the Swedish government made the decision to make a comprehensive daycare system, and it's been built out since then. 1975, there were 10% of Swedish children going to daycare, and now you can talk about 90% today. The results that we can see after 35 years, this is something probably no other nation in the world can look at. We know from 35 years of experience what this leads to, and you can, choosing the right statistics, paint a very beautiful picture. But when you look at the actual life in Sweden, you see more alarming things. The results in child development, in learning, in parenthood, and family are quite alarming. And when you look at the consequences you're beginning to see today, I mean, in these very last months, you can see that this is also getting alarming results in politics and even democracy. And in a sense, it's difficult when you're in the middle of something to see, but the sense many of us in Sweden are having is that this may actually be a lot more alarming than you're actually aware of. It's a very alarming situation in a sense, and nothing bad is going to happen in the next year, but over the next 10 or 20 years, it's a situation that alarms you. So just some personal details about me. Now, Andrea told you most of it. I wrote this book, which is in Swedish, which is why I'm doing a short translation in English by the end of the year. It's Following Your Heart in the Social Utopia of Sweden. It was in a way my way of, as a management consultant, I was used to making sense out of work team and businesses. And I saw a lot of signs in Sweden that I was worrying about. Why do we have these problems in one of the richest countries in the world with great social welfare, with great evenly distributed wealth, every figure on wealth, material wealth was high. Why are we having the problems? So I, in a way, took on Sweden as a consultant project. And when I finished it 4 years ago, I realized today that I made one mistake with this book. I wrote it in the wrong language. Nobody would touch it in Swedish except, a few people like those who were kind of interested in this. I did manage to sell, almost sold 1,000 copies of it today. And I'll get back to that in a moment. So I founded the Mireja Institute. I'm also the member of the Haro National Board, which is Sweden's leading family organization with a critical view on the Swedish family policies. Now you would imagine that it's a big organization. It's not. It's a completely voluntary work organization with 1,000 members, although we've had some success in coming down into Europe. I'm also the president of Rohus, which is the Swedish Association for Home Education. Now I know that's not too common in Canada, but it's a lot more common in Canada than it is in Sweden. And also I will give you an example. This will show in a way the real problem with Swedish family policies in a way you can see in their essence in the view on homeschooling in Sweden. I'm a self-employed management consultant since 1981, so I've basically financed all my work with writing it through my own work. I'm married to Tamara, father of 3 children, and don't see it too well here. Anyway, this is my family, and you could say that this is in a way the big support. I'm not a political conservative. In fact, I was brought up on the left, and you know the Swedish left is very left. When I was young, I was into that, but you know I grew up, started my business, and had a family, and things kind of changed with the life experience. I'm not a family traditionalist in any sense. My mother was a second-wave feminist, and I was kind of seen as an exception, so I got a good upbringing in my younger years. I'm not religious. I have not studied religious texts. When I went to school, there was Christianity in schools, so I know some of the biblical stories, but you have to realize Sweden is an extremely secular nation with very low idea about family, and all of these of us in Sweden who are engaged in these issues, what we come from is solely from the experience of the attachment with our children. It's like we've seen there is something here that's not being addressed in our society, and it seems to be something fantastic. Why is it not addressed? So you can say in a way that Sweden is a society that has gone completely non-traditionalist, non-conservative, non-religious, and in the midst of this, families are rediscovering family, rediscovering children, and we're starting to build something in a way from scratch. And although we're very few of us in Sweden, still you must say that we're a growing movement. And if you look at the few people we may be maybe a dozen people working, on voluntary, no financial support whatsoever, but we are making some noise in the media, and we are getting some way through, although we haven't made any big political decisions yet. So basically, how I started this thing is like, I think it was in the year, 20,000. I came to school to do a training on counseling skills. I hadn't been in school for 10 years. This was my first consultant job in a school in many years. And I remember this morning, I come in there to this setting up my things, and the headmaster, the principal of the school, come towards me and says, "Isn't it terrible? I mean, the psychological health of our youth is just going down so much. It's causing us so many problems. It's so difficult. It's so different than it was 20 years ago." And then at lunch, the teachers were on to me. They were all talking about this. They were alarmed. They were concerned. And I wasn't aware of it. I was kind of surprised. And I was like, how is this? 2 years later, we had a very intense debate in Sweden on the great number of Swedes on sick leave. Now, we've got a generous sick leave insurance in Sweden, and still, why would Swedes be among the least healthy people in the world, or at least in Europe at the time, especially women? And this is kind of what grabbed my attention to this. Then I started having more and more women coming to my workshops with 1-year-olds who were complaining to me. They just said a sentence fleeting, "It's so painful to leave my 1-year-old in daycare. I didn't really want to, but I didn't see any choice, but it's so painful. It doesn't feel right." And by now, I was starting to put these things together, and 2003, I started working on my book. It took me 4 years. I got it together. Wasn't much noise about it. I met a few members of parliament, though, and one of them got me to do a seminar at the Swedish parliament. And I had 30 parliamentarians there. I got 15 minutes to summarize my 600-page book. I did my best. And a few weeks after, in January 2009, I just thought, this is only 6 pages. I could translate this to English and put it on the web. I did. And then I started to learn the power of the English language. Because since then, things have evolved. I got involved in a European Commission project on future family policies. I got to speak in Portugal in May last year. And then I've spoken in Brussels, in Italy, in Hungary. Now I'm in Ottawa. In 2 weeks, I'll be in Portugal again. 3 weeks, I'll be in Ireland. And in 4 weeks from now, I'll be in New York on the United Nations, where I'm invited to an expert panel, although I'm not formally an expert. I'm just simply a consultant. So what I'm going to talk about today is some basics about the Swedish family model, so you know what I'm talking about, the facts that we know about. I'm going to talk something about the outcomes, and this is what is not known in the world. You do not know about the outcomes because you look at very general figures about income, about how many children are in daycare, about things like that. And although if you've read the PISA results from our schools, you should be a bit alarmed seeing that Sweden is just going down and Canadian schools are bringing a lot better results than what Swedish schools are doing. I will look at some possible causal explanations for this. This will always be difficult, but it's actually quite easy if you're willing to have some psychological sense. I'll look something at the social and political outcomes, which may actually be even more alarming, something about what the Swedes want, and something about the conclusions that we can make from this. So you know probably all about the great Swedish statistics. We have the lowest infant mortality in the world. We have a very high life expectancy. I think only Japan is ahead of us for Japanese women. We have a relatively high birth rate, which of course hides the fact that who's raising the children. It's not so much the parents in Sweden anymore. We have low child poverty. We'll have among the lowest in the world and only half of the average in the European Union. We have a comprehensive daycare scheme, which is highly subsidized at very little cost to parents. We have a very high education spending. I believe we spend among the most money per pupil, both in daycare and in schools, of any nation in the world. We should expect absolutely brilliant results looking at the social welfare we have. We do not have those results in Sweden. We have equality. Sweden has a tradition of equality. The wealth is relatively evenly distributed. We don't really have very poor people in Sweden, and we have fewer very rich people. So the difference is growing, but still, by international comparison, we're a relatively equality country. There's a great focus on gender equality in Sweden, and some people call it like a state religion of today. In actual fact, though, you'll see it in Parliament. Our Parliament is very impressive with a 50-50 split, and we're probably way ahead of you in Canada in that. But when you look at it close, you'll see that hides some figures that are not so impressive. We have a 16-month parental leave, which gives 13 months at 80% of your pay, and then an extra 3 months at a lower pay. Of the 13 months at the higher level, the father has to take out 2 months of that. So they want to make it a split, so we could have in a few years that you have 8 months to the mother and 8 months to the father. This is all for gender equality. Now, if you look at the basics of the model, you first of all realize that we have no babies in daycare in Sweden. This is something our parental leave does. People are at home. There are no children at all below 12 months of age in daycare. I look at the statistics. There were 4, I think, in all of Sweden. And I think this is something good about the Swedish model, that you have this generous parental leave. It means that everybody can afford to be at home with the children the first year, no matter what your salary is. But then it radically changes. At between 16 and 18 months, there's a radical shift, because then the message is given, now your child needs daycare and you as a parent need to work. So a full 92% of all 18-month to 5-year-olds in Sweden are in daycare. This was maybe around 80% 10 years ago, and around 70% 20 years ago. And it shows no sign of reducing. We're going to see this creeping up slowly as the years are coming. Today, also, parents who are at home, being unemployed, or having parental leave for a smaller child are encouraged to have the children daycare. So above 3 years of age, they get free 15 hours a week daycare. And in the last election, our Social Democratic leader said she wanted to increase it to 30 hours per week free for parents who are at home. Why? Because every child has a right to daycare. Every child has a right to daycare is what the leading politician of the Social Democratic Party said in the last election. And you'll see today that there are some local governments who are actually starting to affect this already now, although they don't have to do this. The daycare is low cost to parents. Basically, you pay $150 a month, and it's a limit to it so that even if you've got an extremely high salary and you've got 3 kids in daycare, you will never pay more than about $300 per month. There's a maximum tax. You will never go above a certain level. And this is, of course, highly subsidized. The subsidy on the average is 20,000 Canadian dollars per year and child. That's the subsidy for every child. And you might know other figures here, but it's a very high sum. And trust Sweden to know how to use taxed money. There's no national home care allowance or any tax benefits. Those of us in the family movement, in the 2006 election, we did manage to push for getting some form of home care allowance. And some people even say, one minister said that it was actually the family movement who helped the center-right government come into power because of this question. Now, once in government, there was a lot of discussion about this because there's only one party in our current 4-party coalition who actually wants the home care allowance, which is also the smallest party. It's the Christian Democrats. They have about 5% of the votes. And there was a lot of discussion, but after a year, they decided on a home care allowance that was optional for local governments to use. They didn't have to use it, and it was around 400 Canadian dollars per month. And because politicians don't like this, they want kids to be in daycare and parents to work, only 1/3 of the municipalities actually offer this. And it's difficult to use, and it's not as popular as hoped to be. And the argument against it is, listen, nobody wants to use this, so why have it? You know? On the other hand, they will argue it would be really dangerous if too many people use this, because then we would have to lay down daycare. So they cannot decide if it's very popular or very unpopular. And it's this enormous cultural pressure on daycare in Sweden, which I do not think you can understand in Canada. And speaking to Canadian parents and speaking to Canadians for the last week here, I realized you cannot understand the intense cultural pressure that this is in Sweden and how normalized it is. The daycare and dual earner household is strongly encouraged, both culturally and financially. Sweden's got very high taxes. The tax system is designed for the dual earner family. You're not supposed to be able to support a family on one income, and this is the outspoken policy of our government, whether it's on the left side or on the right side, because daycare is seen as good for children and work is good for parents. Home care is actively discouraged and socially marginalized. When you have a child and you bring your child to the medical professions to have it checked up at 6 months, they will say to you, the nurse will say to you, I hope now that you've signed up for a good daycare place of your choice. You know? When you come there at a year, they will remind you again, now have you signed up for a good daycare place? And as one mother told me when she came at 18 months, your children is not in daycare? Oh, you have to sign him up for daycare, you know. He needs to be in daycare to learn to be social, and you need to be in work. That is how strong it is. And every single government institution will put forth the great quality of Swedish daycare and how good it is for children and how it makes them socialized and how it improves their mathematics. Note that mathematics was the poorest subject in the PISA research. It's actually the one where we're below the OECD average. If you take the extreme, homeschooling is in effect illegal. There are 100 homeschooled children in Sweden. Now, transferring that to a Canadian population, that would mean 350 homeschooled children in all of Canada. Now, I know you've got something like 20 or 30 or 40,000 in Canada. And although this is a small thing, this is in a way where you can really see the family policies. They are extremely hard on this. You may have heard the story of Dominic Johansson, who 2 years ago was captured on a plane. The police went into a plane when the family was going to India, the birth country of the boy's mother. The police came in there and took him, and the parents didn't see him again until once every 6 weeks or so. And the reason was homeschooling. They say, actually there was no reason, they just took the boy and then found out the arguments afterwards. I've read some of the verdicts, and the verdict from the courts are scary, because it actually says, as the boy has not been in daycare and now not the first year in school, he's been harmed. Which is, absolutely unbelievable, but it actually says it in writing in the court verdict. I've met the father 2 weeks ago of this boy, and there's nothing wrong with his father. There's nothing wrong with the love of his son. There's no reason to believe that he is in any way not a good parent to his son, rather the contrary. And this, of course, has made Swedish homeschoolers are terrified at this. It's a scary situation, and you see basically homeschooling parents being prosecuted either with high fines of up to 40,000 Canadian dollars per year. There's one family being threatened with 40,000 Canadian dollars for a year of homeschooling. Others get directly put to social authorities, and we have a family in Stockholm who's now having their 4th social investigation in 2 years. And they are determined to find out something wrong. I know the family. They're wonderful children. They're a wonderful family. There's absolutely nothing wrong with them whatsoever. And here you have, in a way, the family values, the scary part of the Swedish government. And we're getting a new law now, 1st of July, that's in effect going to make it illegal. And I've looked this through, and in fact, Sweden is the only democratic country ever to make homeschooling illegal, in fact, unless you count Germany in 1938 as a democratic country. Now, when we started this in Sweden in 1975, it wasn't that we were going to do this to be bad. I mean, politicians and some people actually believed this was going to do good. This was going to put Sweden in the forefront of all nations. And you can read in some political documents from the 70s what they saw. They saw that building out a comprehensive daycare system was going to give greater gender equality, better child social development, better child academic development, getting children better prepared for school. It would give greater adult life satisfaction, as they could be employed rather than be at home in the family. And being at home in the family in Sweden is despised, so what are you going to do at home with nothing to do? And there is the joke of saying, oh, you want women to be chained to their stoves. That's an expression used in Sweden. And what our government, our Prime Minister, our Minister of Finance talks very hard about today in our center-right government is the work policy. The work policy. Everyone should have a job. Everyone should work. We have to discourage women from working part-time and make sure they work full-time to give them their freedom. This is actually the words of our Minister of Finance two months ago. So the culture is very extreme in this. Now, let's get to the actual family outcomes. And all what I'm presenting here is official statistics or big surveys that are sponsored by it's all very reliable sources. The first one is that we've seen a strong decrease in psychological health in youth during the last 25 years. This has been put forth in a big government study, and several government institutions have checked up statistics on this. You will see local research done by health professionals. It is something that is being acknowledged. It's not something that is questioned. It's only how to interpret it that you can see some creative ways of trying to say this. I'll tell you in a moment here exactly some of the details of this. The development in Sweden is actually worse than in 11 comparable European countries. The psychological health of Swedish youth is decreasing at a faster rate than in 11 comparable European countries, being Finland, Denmark, Norway, Hungary, Switzerland, Austria, Belgium, Wales, Spain, and Scotland. And what is this about? Well, it's mild psychological problems and psychosomatic disorders like weekly headache, stomach aches, worries, anxieties, and a general feeling of not managing very well. That might not sound that alarming, but if you look at the more serious ones like depression, you will see that there are small numbers, but they are increasing. This form of mild psychological health affects 30% of all girls in Sweden around the age of 15. So it's an increase in 25 years from 9% to 30%. Boys is not as strong there. On the other hand, you can see that boys cause trouble in other ways. They do not get psychological health. I mean, they get disruptive and they get violent in other ways. And of course, this is hard to explain here in Canada, but when you live in Sweden, you see daily, you understand exactly what's behind these statistics. I see these people when I run workshops for managers on presentation technique. You will see typically a young woman in her 25, 30s. She never smiles. And when you're starting to do some exercises, she will want to talk to you, and she will talk and open oceans of self-doubt, lack of self-esteem, and a lot of things you really just feel sorry for them. And you wonder, how could this person get to university and get a good job? Well, women do. Women who have psychological problems or problems with attachment, they do manage. The men don't. They become the truck drivers, or in Sweden, the unemployed ones. We've got a very high rate of unemployment. I could give you an example over this. The difficult thing here is, like, many of these don't have a diagnosticable psychological disease, but they are definitely not living up to their potential. And you can see lots and lots of this. You have very high levels of early retirement for young people in Sweden. And we have a very high level of young people unemployment. Now, the irony is this, right? One of the reasons cited for this increase, there are two reasons given from official sources. One man of the Swedish Public Health Institute says the reason for this is probably that young people in Sweden have so many choices today. Second reason given by another institution is it must be about about young people unemployment for 15-year-olds. Now, the irony is this, that we force mothers and parents to go out to work and leaving young people unemployed. And rather than seeing that actually smaller children need the possibility to be with their children and be home, and older youngsters who may be 16, 18, 20, they need to get a job to get in society, we've twisted it around. And no one, of course, is wanting to verbalize how these things are connected. So this is alarming, and when I go to the seminars given by Swedish public authorities on this, they will say, yes, we are concerned about this. Yes, this is alarming. Yes, we don't know what to do about it. Do you know why the reason is? We don't know. I'm suggesting, could it have to do with early daycare? Ask the question. They say, we don't know. We have discipline problems and poor results in schools. You know from the PISA report that Sweden has gone from a top position about 30 years ago, where we were among the best in the world. Today we're only average. And we're actually below average in mathematics, which Daycare was claimed to make better. We also have severe discipline problems, and the TIMSS study, T-I-M-M-S, show that the order in Swedish classroom is among the worst in Europe. We talk about tardiness, about truancy, about disruptive behavior, and bad language in classrooms. It's among the worst in Europe, it's reported by Swedish headmasters. And this is also very obvious when you live in Sweden. We have a reality show where a professional teacher, a really good teacher, comes into a problem school to try to steer it up. And when you see the environments from inside school, I mean, you're terrified. And this is not only me. This is going out today into the Swedish general public. They are terrified at what they're seeing happening in school. And you can see a small general protest movement about the quality in Swedish schools. Now, of course, those of us with a little more psychological understanding realize that it's not only schools, it's lack of parents, and it's actually problems that started already at the age of 1 with too little parents and too much daycare. We have high rates of sick leave among women. This is a study done in the Swedish Medical Journal, a peer-reviewed journal, with the headline, "Who can work until 65 years of age?" and the subtitle, "Not the Swedish women." And these are the Swedish women who are in their 50s and who show a very high rate of sick leave and early retirement in their 50s, and many go on early retirement from the age of 55. Now, the irony is this: we created this whole system to partially to get women to do more work. Now, if we'd let those women or those parents stay at home to be with the children for 10 years, they could probably work till 65, maybe till 70. But we're forcing them to have children and do work at the same time, and they're burnt out by the age of 55, to put it bluntly. And basically, the only thing that pioneering Swedish families are asking for, please don't make us do it at the same time. We'll be happy to work when our children have gotten older, but give us a chance to be with our children when they're small. We'll be happy to work later on. Daycare staff top our sick leave statistics. And you know, that's just a fact. That's also shown there, and they are the ones who have a lot of long-term sick leave. And as the quality of, I'll get to that, we have deteriorating parental abilities, even middle class. There's been an EU-sponsored study done by a Swedish researcher who has, through various interviews, found out the state of Swedish parenthood. And she writes in her conclusions like this: the public offer of full child daycare seems to make many parents lose grip of their own responsibility. They believe, or want to believe, that their children are fostered by preschool and school, and they believe that the experts on their children are to be found there. And she says that it's obvious from a psychological perspective that preschool and school cannot fill the gaps caused by a lack of time and trust in parenthood from the parents. And again, if you live in Sweden, this quickly also becomes apparent. You will see many Swedish parents who, yes, they do love their children, and the function they're having is more like a coordinator of activities. They get the children up in the morning, get them to daycare or to the before-school activity. They go to school, they come back, they do the after-school activity, the parents pick them up, they have dinner, and then they go to an activity in the evening. And parents become an organizer of activities rather than a parent having a relationship with their child. And when the child comes into their teens, there are the teenage problems we know from the Western world. They are certainly not less in Sweden. And now the newspapers write, where are the parents? Well, Sweden is a country where parents were discouraged at the age of 1 from taking care of their children. How are they expected to suddenly start at the age of 13 when the problems come? Sorry for the sarcasm of the hard words, but living in Sweden is very frustrating when you're a home parent today. The quality in Swedish daycare is deteriorating. Those of you who've read the National Post article know of a recent radio interview there. And we actually have 3 Swedish experts who wrote a book published 2 years ago. The title would be Preschool for the Smallest Children, for Good and for Bad. And this is a Swedish psychiatrist, a Swedish educator specialist, and a Swedish preschool teacher have joined together. And their conclusion is basically that since the beginning of the 90s, the quality of Swedish preschools has gone so bad today that Sweden cannot be said to have high-quality daycare anymore, in spite of $20,000 per child a year. They also say that the quality is so low that some sensitive children will be hurt impeded in their development by going to long hours of daycare in early ages. And this is also something that is quite known in Sweden now. I'll show you the groups in a moment. The total fertility rate, well, yes, we're high in Europe, but one should note that we're low among the Nordic countries. Both Finland and Norway have higher fertility rates than Sweden. Both Norway and Finland do have a home care allowance. You look at Finland, have a much stronger family culture, and you have much fewer small children in daycare in Finland. They also have better school results. The Swedish labor market is among the most gender segregated in the world. What I understand from the statistics, you'll find that in America you have a pretty high percentage of women as managers in companies. It's very low in Sweden. In Sweden, basically, women work in daycare, in schools, and in healthcare. Men work in in higher administrative positions and in business. And is very segregated, and in a way you could say, if you wanted to be a bit blunt, that we have transformed home mothers into state mothers, taking care on a state level rather than at a home level. And of course, I think here's where you see the ambivalence in Swedish women. You know, why should I work in the state, caring for lots of people with very little control and a lot of political ideology coming upwards through my boss, where I could be at home and be totally in charge of my own home, my own children, and grow from there. And which I mentioned in my book, there's of course lots of anecdotal studies and others showing that women may actually grow more from being 10 years at home with their own children than they would be working at a daycare center or at a school. And actually be more attractive to the labor market once they come out. And there's lots and lots of evidence of that. So just quickly, quality of Swedish daycare. 1/5 of all the daycare groups today are more than 21 children. For the under 3s, they're never below 10 children. They're often 14 and sometimes 17 children. You will have 17 children with 3 carers. Some carer may be sick. There are moments, there are hours in Swedish daycare where one person is left with 17 children under 3. 3 to 5-year-olds can be upwards 30 children. The child staff ratio is slightly above 5.1, but 7.1 in my municipality exists, and even 10.1 exists. In my municipality, the local government decided to build a music hall. It costs a lot of money, and we have a 7-to-1 ratio. So that's where you see what child care is going to be compared with. It's obvious that parents are willing to sacrifice a lot more for their children than politicians are. There's no regulation in Sweden of group sizes or child staff ratios. Both are continuously increasing all the time, and our politicians are talking about that we have to find other quality measures than group size and child to staff ratio. Now ask any psychologist, it'll tell you that is quality. A traditional focus on play and now more and more being diverged into learning and pedagogics, which is of course a way of trying to hide the fact that you've got bigger and bigger groups. Now, for the lack of the possible causal explanations, here is one knows from psychology and neurobiology that lack of adult attachment in infants can create chronically low thresholds of stress through life. And when you look at the sick leaves, especially of young women in Sweden, you absolutely have the sense that there are lots and lots of young people in Sweden who have this problem. They easily get stressed. They cannot manage the way. The separation at early year was too much for some of them. You have Canadian psychologist Dr. Gordon Neufeld, who has coined the expression peer orientation, and says that large exposure to big groups of peers can impede child maturation, because peers cannot bring up children. You have to have an adult to do that. Only an adult can provide that unconditional love for a child to grow in, and that emotional maturity. Peers cannot. And yet you'll see already in daycare how the children play together and 3 staff stand and talk to one another. No? It's actually encouraged. It becomes easier to do it that way, to get the children involved with one another. And when you look at teenagers in Sweden, it's very obvious that they gang together in groups, not always destructive, but they are actually bringing up, you have in a way the Lord of the Flies scenario quite strong in Sweden. And this leads to a lot of problems in learning, bullying, gangs, flatlining of culture, promiscuity, because young people are making up their own rules. And of course, for parents, this separation, parents in Sweden are not happy about it. So you could expect from that they get more sick because they're more stressed. And yes, they do. The statistics show this. And it's obvious also that Swedish parents do not have the same sense of responsibility. They trust the daycare system and the school system to foster their children. Don't have so much time left, but I'm going to look on a few of these. There's very little political debate about this in Sweden, because no one wants to wake up the guilt feelings in parents. No paper selling issues want to do this. And there seems to be in Swedish media a kind of an agreement about that daycare is good, we should support it, just like immigration is good. And daycare is claimed to be a part of Swedish school. Like I told you, we're talking about that every child has the right to daycare. Home care and housewives are bullied in the media. Families becoming politically incorrect. Civil society is dying. And we're having a politicized discussion on child rearing. This has enormous implications. Yesterday I got a mail from someone. There's been a state-sponsored study on how to do sex education in preschool. Now, well, you know, sex is innocent, right? It's okay with sex, right? As long as you use contraceptives, and it's okay as long as you both want it. And young people play these games. It's very important. It's innocent. We have sex education schemes for young people in Sweden, which even secular and morally liberal in Sweden find this is just too much. Being given to 12-year-olds, which is, well, you know, you can't even talk about it. This is what you see in politics. You see, when politics takes over a family, everything becomes a political decision, how to do it. It's not family anymore, it's politics. And you have politicians who do not have connections necessarily with their children, and they're inventing things that they think sound good. The great majority of Swedes want to have more time. All studies show that between 60 and 80% of Swedes would like to have the possibility to be at home with their children for at least up to 3 or 4 years. And this is also in young mothers. A recent study showed this, that even in young 25, 26-year-olds see this, and they think that being a housewife, or a home mother is something that looks attractive to them. Of course, many of these have looked their own mothers, trying to juggle together work and children, and seeing that you have to choose if you're going to have a good life. So I'm just going to do these conclusions here quickly before I finish for questions. You can definitely say that Swedish family policies have led to negative developmental outcomes for children, parents, and family. That's just there. There's no fact of arguing that. You could try and argue the reasons are otherwise, but if you look into the knowledge in psychology, psychiatry, and neuroscience today, there's no way of getting away from that it has had an impact, definitely. Swedish family policies are not emotionally sustainable, maybe not even democratically sustainable, as we can't talk about it in the media. We can't have an open discussion about it. The basic reason for this negative developments could be said that individual childcare in Sweden has become a state political decision based on political ideology rather than a parental decision based on parents' perception of the individual needs of the child. I think this is maybe the most important conclusion to see. This is where it goes when parents lose touch of their children on kind of any mass scale. You would have to really check out the Swedish model before anyone attempts to copy this. And I cannot imagine any study today showing that this was a success. It was rather a failure, maybe one of the biggest social failures in the history of mankind. It's a grand experiment. We have never before in history been able to make these big experiments. It's an experiment. Every society has to protect parental rights and reasonable possibilities to make their own choice about children, and without the involvement of government. So I'm thinking for Canada, you must have a government which gives the message, whatever care you choose is okay. We'll support whatever it is. You want to do home care, wonderful. There are other forms too. But that has to be there. Parental instincts have to be what guides the care for the children. And once that's gone, it's gone, and you're into a dangerous negative flow. And basically, in today's world, the institution of family needs support and respect from society and government. Family is the key institution for close relationships in the world today. And that's especially in today's world, which is so chaotic, which has got so many temptations in the digital world and everything. Family is actually more important than ever. Some people talk about that we're becoming individuals today, and we're becoming independent and individual. Yes, but where is a mature individual created? In family. Family is required to create a mature individual. This is something that psychology knows today, and the close emotional relationships. So, thank you for your attention, and I'm pleased to have any questions.
If you want to line up at the microphone, then we'll have time for questions, and I'd ask that everybody keep their questions brief. Thank you.
Hi, I'm actually the oldest of 10 homeschooled children, and very happy to have had such a wonderful educational experience. And I was wondering we hear a lot of horror stories over here about Europe, and what you believe is the general state of homeschooling in Europe, and do you expect it to get better or worse?
Well, it's different. I mean, Sweden is an exception together with Germany. Homeschooling is generally allowed in Europe. It's generally allowed in the Nordic country, with the exception of Germany and today Sweden. So it's not a combined picture. Of course, many countries are worried about Sweden tends to be a leader. Now, Sweden forbids homeschooling. Maybe others will too. But we will have to see. We will have to hope. And we're getting good support from North America on this.
You mentioned that the daycare quality is dropping dramatically in Sweden, yet the government is very focused on it. Why is the quality dropping? Is it financially just economically impossible to sustain, or is there some other reasons?
It's because it's costing too much, and because daycare is now under the control of local governments, and there are no rules on how to do it. We've got rules for how many pigs you have in a certain amount. We don't have rules for how many children we have. And it's because of local political reasons. It's becoming too expensive. Can we save something here? This is basically the reason, yes.
Hi. This was very thought-provoking, and I agree with much that you said, but it did strike me, the Canadian figures on adolescent mental health are very poor, even poorer. I mean, the rate is worse than Sweden. So, from the OECD reports, and yet we do not have the same family policy in Canada and childcare. So I'm wondering what other factors you think. I think, family life has changed dramatically, and the role of family in building those strong relationships is changing, and the pressure for families to work in order to pay for the next generation's pensions or their parents' pensions. There are many factors, but I don't think childcare is in itself the driving factor.
I don't know about the Canadian figures. I know about the European ones. But what you have to see here that there are many factors that could attribute a lower mental health in children, and many of them we have not got, because we have not got child poverty. We've got wealthy children, we've got wealthy families, we've got an excellent social system. Those typical factors that you may find more in North America, we do not have. So you can kind of in Sweden rule out the factors about being socially marginalized or having too little money or not getting a job, not being supported. They're out. What's left? And I don't know exactly in Canada, but I know in North America that's different from Sweden. You've got bigger differences. You've got other reasons probably for mental health problems. And at least in the United States, there's quite some daycare going on too of various qualities. And again, the experience of living in Sweden and meeting people and following the debate gives you quite convinced of these figures. I mean, they show another reality.
I wonder about what the impact on your statistics might be of widespread immigration from Muslim countries, and whether there's any difference between what's happening in the cities that have become sort of Muslim enclaves like Malmö and the outcomes for their families versus Swedish families.
Well, I'm not familiar with exactly the figures here, but what I've read about is basically that sure, many of the immigrants have various social problems and they're traumatized from their countries, which is going to lead to bigger problems, but it's not like they in themselves seem to create more problems. In some sense, the immigrants are more able to start their own businesses and get on with things once they have the possibility to do so. And I mean, the mental health problem figures, which is up to 30%, shows that this is something which goes way beyond immigration.
You mentioned that on many indicators, the health of young people has declined, but that they're not necessarily diagnosable. They just do not perform at their best potential. Do you know if there's any evidence already compiled in terms of diagnosable entities, conditions, psychiatric or medical?
Yes, there are. And they have increased. You will see that the number of places in Swedish psychiatric wards have decreased for adults but increased for young people. So these are very small numbers, but they have increased. We have there's a lot of the prescription of psychotherapeutic drugs for young people has increased. It is quite high. The rates of depression have increased. So you will see that also on the more serious end, although that's not regarded as a big problem because still the numbers are relatively small. The really big shift you see is in these more mild psychological disorders.
Hi, quick question. I'm on board with what you're saying, but when you defend it to detractors from an evidence-based perspective, what's the next closest control country to Sweden? Like, is it in Scandinavia in terms of percentages daycare, you know? Because you were saying to the previous question that you can control for perhaps there are less single families, less broken families, less poverty. But so on a control country to country, who's second?
Well, I would guess that you would look like a country like Denmark or Norway. But again, when you look at these countries, you see this is a complex issue, you realize. This is very hard to actually study, and I'm not sure anybody's ever going to be able to prove something. Already, when you look at the research on daycare that's been done in the United States, the NIH-CHD, where they've really tried to isolate all factors, they still say this is difficult. We don't have control groups in the same way. You know? Who has chosen what? And I think you have to weigh in that you have a daycare system in a country with Swedish family culture. And Swedish family culture that you go down from hundreds of years is different in Sweden than it is, for instance, in Finland and in Norway. Now, if that means that Finland has never accepted the kind of policies we have in Sweden, or is that the way around, it's of course very difficult to prove. So it's difficult to do a comparison. And what I usually suggest here is like, you turn it all around. You show this is the country we're having. How would you solve this problem? And what most psychologists would say is, well, obviously your children needs more parental care. So you could turn it around, that for whatever reason, this is not working, at least not in Sweden. And turning it around, you can see that, well, obviously these children need more parental care. That's definitely, that would be my answer.
I'm not sure if they're your style of government in Sweden, but I'm wondering when people are aware of those statistics that 7 out of 10 women would prefer to stay at home with their children at a young age. I would think in a democratic country that you would have people that would use that as a platform to promote change in your nation. And is that happening?
There is one party, 5% of the votes, who claim that. All the others say basically the message is that women are not really aware of, and they could get stuck at home. We call it the women's trap, it's called in Sweden. They could get stuck at home, and actually women don't understand that, so it's much better for the government to encourage them to work instead. So it would take a lot of questioning, and you would have to understand the Swedish political system. Two historians called an analysis the Swedish political system. They say basically Sweden is a parliamentarian dictatorship, because we've got so little constitution that a government can pretty much do whatever they want once they're elected. So if they don't think that this is a huge, big question, they will ignore it. And they will go for something else.
And so just to build on that, have you had any success with media in regards to helping to promote some of these statistics so that people could respond to from across Sweden, and maybe that would bring a greater awareness of the frustration?
These figures come out in the media every now and then. And there will be one article one day, there will be some comments on the net, and nobody from political will comment it. Or they will say, yes, we're concerned. But it will stop at that. It will stop at that. It has not gotten up to becoming in the top agenda of politics, unfortunately, yet.
Hi, I was just wondering how you managed to homeschool if it's illegal.
Well, well, basically, you have to be prepared to leave the country within immediately. You don't have to go far. You can just go to an island in the Baltic Sea, which is Finnish, and you're safe. In the board of the Swedish Association for Homeschooling, basically, in the last 6 months, 2 people there of the 5-person board have emigrated to Finland. So it's scary. It's very scary. For myself, I do believe that I'm a verbal enough a person to kind of ward off things, but it's uncomfortable. It's definitely uncomfortable. And the way you do it actually is you apply for permission, which you have to do, and you get turned down. This is the beginning of the school year. You apply for one school year at a time. You get turned down. Then you appeal to the next higher court. And while doing this, you will get a notice saying your child has to come to school, and you respond, well, we're appealing a decision. We're in a disagreement about the law here. Okay? So something goes, you get turned down by the first, we won actually once, but you get turned down by the lower court. Then you appeal to a higher court. Now you start getting a letter saying that, you might get a fine, or we might put the social authorities on you if you don't comply to this. And you respond back to saying, well, this matter is not settled yet. We interpret the law differently than you do, and until a final verdict has been done, we will continue homeschooling. Then you get turned down there. Then you apply to the highest court. And by the time you get to the highest court, the school year is over. You start all over again. Now, they don't like this, of course, and they see this pattern. So, a few of us, we've managed 2.5 years now, but a few of them doing this, gets scary. And there are some families now who got very high fines, which you also push through the legal system. So far, no one has paid a krona yet. And there is actually a little break. Myself and another family in my town have gotten a break. Our case will be taken up at the mid-court now. So we have some hope that they may actually look at the European Convention of Human Rights, which is a Swedish law, and it's actually a Swedish quasi-constitution. And they might look there and see it's impossible to forbid home education when it's done in a qualified way. So there are some hopes there.
I wanted to continue with the question of the gentleman who preceded me about how to make or effect change if you are saying that there is no will to discuss the issue. And the statistic that stayed with me is the idea that, especially among women, early retirement and sick leave is increasing. And I was wondering, more than talking about government, what effect is that having on companies, on businesses? And how that, when you're thinking that people who could be at their most productive years with years of experience, and all of a sudden these people drop out of the workforce, aren't businesses complaining, and perhaps use that as a way to try to change things around?
A business, I don't think, have that awareness, unfortunately. It is a problem, and this means that this present center-right government has put a lot of pressure on getting people on sick leave back to work. And it's got these extreme consequences where people who have cancer and very serious illnesses are being forced to go to work if they're going to get any kind of benefits. So it's like you're trying to solve the problem by pushing people back to work rather than realizing that it's a hidden social problem behind.
Yeah.
We'll just take these last two questions. Thank you.
To what extent is the problem in Sweden with this situation with daycare fueled by women who are of the feminist ideology trying to impose that on other women?
To nearly 100%. We have an extremely strong feminist movement in Sweden who gets funded by the government, who gets special professors at the university. It's extremely strong. And the fact is that this is a relatively small group of the women who are extreme feminists. If I go out and give a lecture on something similar topic, maybe not as provocative as this one, so in a group of 100 people, there will maybe be 1 or 2 feminists. So most Swedish women do not want it, but our feminists totally dominate the debate, yes.
My question actually goes along with that. You said at the beginning that there's this incredible equality between the genders with 50% parliament, which is fantastic, I think. But it seems like women aren't actually respected. So how do you have equality if what they want isn't respected and where they're allowed to work or encouraged to work isn't equal?
Well, that is the challenge of Swedish equality. Women are respected when they work. I mean, to put it bluntly, women are respected when they behave as men. But when women want to do the things that are unique to being a woman, like caring for small children, then they are not respected at all. This is something we're trying to discuss and debate in Sweden, but that's just a glitch in the argument that never really gets put forth. We're trying to put that forth, that real respect for women means respecting if they want to take care of their children or if they want to work, and honoring both is important. And we're not getting any way with there because the feminists are saying, basically, and they dominate the debate, that women do not really want to take care of children. They will get stuck at home, and they will not get good pensions. They will not get pensions, they will say. And we will say, well, that's easy. Parliament can decide to give them a pension. Or we can't do that. We can't encourage something to go against the work policy. We have to follow the work policy. So it's a very stuck discussion, and these thoughts are just simply not being allowed to emerge with any power in the debate.
So I'd just like to take a moment to thank Jonas, and I really feel very strongly that I should thank you not only for coming all the way to Ottawa to present, but to thank you for what you're doing in Sweden. As I heard you describe the legal battle you face to homeschool your children, thank you for coming here, and thank you for your work in Sweden. Please join me in thanking Jonas Himmelstrand.